But it's time now for Uncancelled. And this is where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. Liz Truss swept into number 10 earlier today, but the story could have been very different if globalist shill Rishi Sunak slithered his way to Downing Street. Disgraced lockdown architect Matt Hancock would have no doubt landed a plum cabinet return, while the likes of the World Economic Forum would have celebrated a Sunak victory. Truss, meanwhile, was a staunch opposer of the liberty-sapping restrictions suffered by this country for 2 years. Here's a reminder of her lockdown pledge during her Tory leadership campaign.
Well, the answer is I did. I did question it. I mean, I was not sitting on the committee that made the decisions. And clearly, in retrospect, we did do too much. You know, it was true draconian. I think there should have been more. I don't think we should have closed schools. Ever. No, I don't think we should. And a lot of children have ended up suffering, you know, educationally with mental health issues as a result of that. And I can assure you and this group here today that I would never impose a lockdown if I am selected as Prime Minister.
Good news, but why did tens of millions of Brits simply nod along and submit themselves, locking themselves up at home and even grassing up their neighbours? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by top author and Star Spectator columnist Lionel Shriver, who has penned a fascinating column on why so few people put their head above the parapet during COVID, despite clearly knowing something wasn't right. And Lionel, I have to say, I'm not just saying this because I wouldn't. This is genuinely one of the best columns I've ever read in my life, so I'm so desperate to talk to you about it. Why did common sense go out the window for so many people during this pandemic?
I haven't completely answered that question for myself, but I think it's worth asking all the time because what was really staggering about lockdown after lockdown wasn't so much the authorities that put them in place, but the fact that people accepted them. And pretty much unquestioningly, and literally overnight with the first one. It was like, oh. When we had subsequent lockdowns, it was as if, oh, here we go, another lockdown, as if we've been doing this for hundreds or thousands of years, when previously a lockdown only applied to a prison or an American school shooting drill. We abdicated every civil right we used to think was inalienable, that it could not be taken away from us. But instead, we imprisoned ourselves in our own homes. We gave the government permission to tell us with whom we could associate, with whom we could even have sex. And there was a lot of de facto censorship of free speech. We had the media speaking with all one voice. And furthermore, not only did everyone more or less go along with it, but the very few people who spoke up and said, hold on here, are we sure this is really effective? And if so, why haven't we done it before during previous pandemics? Why are we copying China of all countries? You know, the few people who voiced concerns were demonized and treated like traitors and murderers. We were murderers.
No, indeed. And I loved all of that. But then I think what I found most fascinating is the theory that you're developing, that this phenomenon is something that's happening more and more in culture, the entire world being swept up in these movements that don't really make any sense, be it, all taking the knee for BLM or trans extremism. And we're just expected to treat them as completely normal and not question things that just a few months earlier would have not made sense to anyone.
Yeah, I think it's worth taking a step back occasionally. Especially during the last 10 years, I've noticed a recurrence of what I would call social manias. Yeah. And they happen very quickly. The obsession with transgenderism, the Me Too movement, the total hysteria, the international hysteria after George Floyd was murdered with the Black Lives Matter movement, and then COVID lockdowns. And I would say we're in another one with the so-called climate emergency. And it's when they take over, everyone says the same thing. They think the same thing. They use the same phrases over and over again. No one brooks any dissent. Any kind of dissent against these social manias is perceived as treasonous or dangerous. And now we have social media controlling us, and because anything that goes against these controlling narratives is misinformation or disinformation. I am a little mystified why this keeps happening. I appreciate the fact that we have had social manias before. Back in the 1990s, for example, there was that weird, that suppressed memory syndrome where everyone decided all at once that they had been abused by their parents when they were babies. Mm-hmm. It was horribly destructive. It tore families apart.
No, it did, and that's why it's so worth questioning. I think if the acceptance of lockdown is part of something bigger going on in society, all I can recommend is I posted Lionel's column on my Twitter page, at Dan Wootton on Twitter. I implore you to read it. It was such an important piece of work. My goodness, I wish I'd written it myself. Lionel Shriver, top author, Star Spectator columnist, thank you so much.